I miss Sierra Blue already. You know, I always felt that the iPhone 13 Pro Max was going to be a tough act to follow. It marked the first time that any successor replaced the 4S as my favorite iPhone ever, even if, notice, I say iPhone. I don't necessarily feel that Apple makes the best smartphones or brings the most innovation, but if there's one thing the company does right is mastering the art of the old reliable. It's like that emotional attachment you develop with your car, which, if you think of it, is something most people don't really change every year. Cue in the iPhone 14 Pro Max, which is a lot of its predecessor, at least in looks, but not necessarily once you start using it. After spending a weekend with it, let's just say that my first impressions are kind of a mixed bag. I'm Jaime Rivera with Pocketnow, and let's dive in. So, full disclaimer, this is not yet a review because these are retail units. We bought them just like most of you. And obviously, the journey to tell you if this was a good buy or not requires a bit more time. For now, I'll tell you that a lot of my experience has been as familiar as it's different. Unboxing this phone has been pretty much the same experience as the 12. Obviously, the new art to tell you that this is a newer phone, but then on the inside, all you really get is the phone, the lightning cable to USB-C, since we might have to wait for the EU ruling to take effect, and which then leads to the first jarring change. See, this is an unlocked iPhone, but there is no SIM ejector tool because there is no SIM tray. I was pretty verbal about this on Twitter because I don't think that Apple provided enough information as to how this would affect us. I'm on a plane every week, so I care about having the liberty to swap my SIM cards wherever I find it convenient, and now that won't be as simple, at least overseas. Now, within the United States, the experience was actually pretty good. AT&T was nice enough to activate this phone in minutes by just sending them the device's data when being unlocked. But then watch Michael Fisher's video to see the full process with the QR code, because as a consumer, it's actually just as practical. Thing is, it was instant, and you can set up to 8 SIM profiles stored on your phone, kind of like a wallet. The only question is if carriers overseas will support eSIM on the kind of prepaid plans that we're used to getting. I'll be reporting on that later. The rest of the setup process was fairly simple if you come from an old iPhone. Actually, the process of porting everything from your entire setup to even your Apple Watch and accounts follows on the Cupertino tradition of quick and easy. Now, as for the hardware, obviously I ordered purple because I always get the new color, but I'm still not fond of it. Sierra Blue did a great job at remaining clean and elegant, even with smudges, and here that isn't really the case, and something tells me none of the other colors will do a comparable job to last year's signature finish. This deep purple looks more like a tainted black unless you shed some light on it, so at least I'll give it points for being different and elegant. Everything else feels pretty familiar, from the heft of the phone to the pronounced camera hump that does not help on a table. I'm honestly surprised that Apple didn't really give much of a light to its ceramic shield or even MagSafe at its keynote, but I remain loyal to my mouthed invisible stand given its added versatility and how it helps you balance the phone while laying flat. Now, I think the display is another thing that still hasn't fully grown on me. I'm always a fan of how Apple implements the basics, from the color reproduction to the added brightness for outdoor use. This phone just carries one of the best OLEDs in the industry, period. I'm also pretty fond of this always-on display, even if I know that a lot of people are mixed. I mean, sure, we've been used to Android showing us a minimal clock for years, but I see nothing wrong in having the refresh rate so well tuned that we can see a full depiction of the lock screen. Sure, I get it, it's kind of confusing, so if anything, I'd suggest future flexibility toggles. As it stands, you can't even dim it, but whether it's that or maybe a way to turn it black and white or switch the color like the Apple Watch Ultra can do, and I think that would look pretty hot. Now, where I'm mixed with this panel is honestly the Temptation Island. Like seriously, it's not that I don't like the Dynamic Island name, but this was not the brightest idea in my opinion. So here's my problem. Android manufacturers have been doing punch holes for at least 4 years, so it was inevitable for Apple to join, but as opposed to the way a Pixel or a Galaxy does it, where the purpose is for you to forget that it's there, I think the idea of making it a feature was because it's actually a bit more intrusive than the notch. See, it sits lower on the display, meaning content gets pushed down, which means I'm now debating if we should go back to 16:9 video because anything wider will be cut by the island in ways the notch did not. And then apps also clearly need an update to embrace it, as some currently kill its symmetry. And sure, I love having a persistent way to go back to whatever audio is playing on my speakers, and I do consider it genius for third-party applications to get creative with it, but I feel a dynamic notch would have been a better idea. That or just killing Face ID and bringing back Touch ID under the display. I mean, that's my 2 cents. You let me know what you would prefer in the comments. I will have a deeper dive on my final impressions of iOS 16 when my review is ready, but I've been using the beta for months and I genuinely adore what Apple has done here. This idea of dynamic lock screens matched with useful widgets is pretty genius. I'm sure Diego loves being able to cut out anyone or anything easily from a photo, because the rest of the changes are not necessarily something I'd consider major, but they contribute to the little things people usually become fond of. Yes, I have seen a ton of your complaints on endurance on older iPhones, which was clearly common for my experience when I was using the beta. Now, since I updated to version 16.0.1 since the moment that I unboxed the phone, it's odd, but I don't consider it to be bad at all. Again, it's too early for me to judge, and especially after the toll this phone takes when I'm setting it up. I do know Apple brought lots of improvements to this newer model, from a more modern A16 Bionic to faster RAM to help boost endurance on a slightly smaller battery, but I think the most important change is the newer 5G modem, which I'll be testing on the AT&T network. I have a feeling that this entire combo is what's handling the new iOS better. Now, this also marks the first major change that Apple has done to this camera system in years. iPhones have been hooked on 12-megapixel shooters since the iPhone 6s, but it's important for you to not let the change in numbers fool you necessarily. Yes, 48 megapixels sound like a lot, but Android phones and even Windows phones have done pixel binning for years. Unless you want to use ProRAW photos, divide the 48 by 4 and consider you're getting a 12-megapixel camera with larger pixels for improved results. That being said, this is not a regular binning sensor. Usually these come with pixels that are less than the size of a micron, but since this approach is actually larger than even what's on the Galaxy S22 Ultra, each single micron here is larger than average, making the multiple quite outstanding. I'll need more time to give you a photo verdict, but so far it's been great, though I'm also kinda mixed. Theoretically, the focal length has improved to 24mm in equivalent, but I don't really see it. The 13 Pro allow you to get closer before triggering the macro mode, where this camera doesn't let you get as close. That said, you now have a 2x crop as an alternative for that, and which I actually prefer for some straight photography over the 3x. And then also keep in mind, this is not just any trashy crop given the larger pixels. I also love the colors and having the permanent photo profile, so all you see here is rich contrast since I do love my Google Pixel stylized shots. I'll be sure to give you a full comparison to last year's 13 Pro Max, but so far I do notice some subtle changes in color and some major improvements in detail. The ultra-wide camera sensor is also now larger, which you might not tell during day photos, but which becomes pretty evident in low light. I do feel the detail could be a tad better given the specs, but this is an initial impression. A funny thing is that even if this new iPhone brings autofocus to the selfie camera, It's not like if the previous one was bad. Obviously, having a brighter aperture now requires it, and you'll be able to notice that in the added shallow depth of field. Now, video is where I was a bit concerned, as no camera manufacturer or even Android makers have been able to nail good video out of larger sensors. It requires just too much processing power, leading to either warping or rolling shutter, but there's none of that here. This is where you know that this A16 Bionic is not playing around. So far, video quality has been just as great as before, though I'll be looking into the extra perks in action mode and cinematic 4K for the review. Alright, I can't really say to conclude because I'm just getting started, but I think you understand why my first impressions have been mixed. The hardware seems to be the same, the color is then not my favorite, the eSIM situation still has a few unknowns, and the dynamic island is a mix of good ideas on an implementation that's not better than last year. That said, the camera is better, iOS 16 is better, the internals are better, and the fact that a lot of the experience remains familiar is yet another reason this lineup continues to be the old reliable. Time will tell if the reasons I'm mixed can morph into the added delights that make all of us return to iPhones every now and then, but obviously that'll be what's left for the full review. Let us know what you think in the comments down below about our first impressions. Do you like this phone? Did you order it? Are you still waiting? And while you're at it, follow us on social media and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this one. You can also follow me on my personal handles to see me watch Temptation Island again, because God, that name was funny. Please give this video a thumbs up if you like what you saw. I'm Jaime Rivera. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you on the next one.